So as moderator, as you have seen, moderator plays a role. So I'm going to read from this book. This is a book that we produced during the COVID, so you have to bear with me. But on second thought, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to let the panelists speak, and my job would be to keep time. So I'll start with the extreme right, and then we'll follow along this line. So the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. I'm sorry that we have to be between you and dinner. That's one of the worst sessions to be on, but thank you for coming and participating.
And you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So lessons of COVID, a topic that has been covered on and on in the last 3 years extensively and widely. I would just like to, it's an anecdote actually. Earlier this year, Delta Airlines published a poll asking, as a way of promoting their destinations, they had a poll asking their participants and people on social media, what was the city that changed your life? Alluding to destinations, and one of the most popular comments was Wuhan, and I think it is very true. It has definitely changed our life, maybe not in the way that Delta Airlines wanted it, but I'll be brief because we have a very short period of time. Some of the lessons that we've learned from COVID-19, we've learned that infections or infectious diseases are a whole of society issue. 1 in every 1,300 people alive in 2019 has died from COVID-19, unfortunately. The second lesson that we've learned is that we have remarkable abilities to produce medical, in this case actually vaccines. It was in record time, it was in 326 days since the genomic sequence to the authorization of COVID-19. Now there's talk of moving it down to 100 days for future possibilities of similar pandemics. Weaknesses in vaccine manufacturing and equitable distribution will definitely require change. And despite of the successes of the vaccine R&D, there have been persistent inequalities in access to it, in particular in allocation and in manufacturing. In this pandemic, we've seen that success in public health has depended both on the public's trust in government and a shared social contract among citizens. And we've learned the hard way that trust is very, very difficult to manufacture during a crisis. The other lesson is that government policy definitely matters, but it's also that individual behavior also maybe matters even more. And this dynamic played out in a couple of ways, starting with, particularly with lockdowns and the mask mandates in 2020. These were largely effective, but their effectiveness varied depending on how seriously the populations of certain countries took the rules, and therefore also hesitancy on vaccine was very high. Education was a very significant change during the COVID. Online learning proved to be, unfortunately, a very poor substitute for classrooms, particularly for disadvantaged groups and the poor. And as a result, we have a lot of students that are now left behind in many cases. The stress of that also boiled down in certain cases to political activism. The economic stimuli that was part of the COVID response by governments works, but it works only in concert with strong public health measures. Countries that struggled to control the virus initially suffered worse economic scenarios. And finally, one of the most important ones was that work will never be the same. Millions have quit, particularly women. And people who kept their jobs are questioning the old assumptions. A lot of work has moved online, and now employees, but also employers, see the world differently. And we're seeing some of the results in the sharpening labor shortages. That would be me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you everyone. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. It's a pleasure being here again. I would like to keep talking a bit what you were saying, and I would like to spend a few words on remote working. I'm a consultant and I work for a company which has adopted a full remote working model even before the pandemic. So I truly believe in it. I'll try to be as quick as possible. We saw that the remote working model has had many benefits for workers, companies, and institutions. For instance, people can now save commuting time and commuting costs. We have companies who can access a really wide range of talent. And we have institutions who can benefit from more social inclusion. Think about the employment gap between disabled and non-disabled people that can be closed thanks to remote working, but also an increased tax revenue because company can save money, can hire more, can pay more taxes, and governments have also to pay less subsidies. So what are the key success factors that individuals, corporations, and countries, states, should take into consideration to make the transition smooth and effective? So first of all, individuals, people, workers should learn how to deal with the new normal. They're now experiencing chronic isolation. They are working maybe often, maybe too often, alone at their home. So they have to put in efforts to make sure they go out, they use co-working spaces, they build interactions with other people. At the same time, companies have to build a completely new corporate culture, which should be made of relationships based on empathy, but that should also understand that people's preferences have changed. Now people want to fulfill their purposes. They want to work and live in line and according to their values. So companies should probably shift from extrinsic incentives to intrinsic one. What does this mean? This means that maybe until 3-4 years ago, if you wanted to make an employee happier, you could have just given him or her a corporate car. Now, not anymore. Think about what Google did, actually some years before the pandemic. Google introduced the so-called 20% rules. The company gave its employees the chance to dedicate 20% of their working time, not personal one, to personal ideas and projects that could somehow benefit the company. And it was thanks to these initiatives that Google was able to launch services like Gmail, AdSense, or Google News. And then, what else should company do? How can they put in efforts to make sure that their employees are connected and close even when working far from each other? Well, they could launch new ways of collaborating. They can take advantage of technological tools. They can organize different events. And when it comes to technological tools, we have to mention the cybersecurity issue, as most of the cybersecurity attacks are people-based. So they take advantage of our weaknesses. So companies should also invest more in training their people and training their employees to avoid that in a moment of increased automation where we have great amount of data, these data are lost or stolen. And then we come to institutions and states. So first of all, they also have to invest in the technological and digital infrastructure, as this is the backbone of a remote working model. At the same time, they should provide the right legal framework. And this is not very easy. I want to tell you more about the Italian experience. So in Italy, when the pandemic hit, the government issued laws and directives to make sure that, let's say, companies and offices which worked with the public administration, as well as the small and medium enterprises, could implement that model as fast as possible. And it was actually a success. a lot of companies managed to do so in a short period of time. But at the same time, after these laws were issued and the transition was made, a survey was launched, and it found that actually for almost half of the entities involved in the program, they experienced increased complexities because they had to deal with paperwork and bureaucracy. So this is something we should be careful about. One last thing I would like to mention are the economic incentives. In general, countries, when it comes to remote working, can use them in two ways. For instance, Lombardia, which is an Italian region, gave around 5 million in non-refundable aid to companies who wanted to implement the remote working model. But then we also have the Colorado state in the United States that gave economic incentives to the companies which were hiring people working from the rural areas of the countries. So we saw the benefits of the remote working model. We should keep assessing them as well as its limitation. And probably one of the challenges we will deal with in the near future is the need for new social contracts, both between institutions and companies, as well as between companies and people. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Pinto. Now we turn to Dr. Kato.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for having me. And today I'm going to talk about China because I specialize China. And second, I think when we discuss the lesson of lockdown, I think as a case study, China cannot be absent. So let me talk about that. And first of all, let me be clear what happened in the past. At the very early stage, back to December 2019, the coronavirus was spreading in China, and even somebody say from China, and Chinese economy was shrinking 6.8% in the first quarter in 2020. But at the end of the day, China, under the Xi Jinping's administration, successfully contained the virus and accomplished the economic recovery, and eventually 2.2% in 2020, and then Xi Jinping and China gradually but substantially emphasized, China led the world to contain the virus and recover the economy, and became more confident and even overconfident. And then, China is great accomplishment or something like that. And at that time, China started conducting so-called World War diplomacy. So this is what happened. And then what's happening right now? 3 years has passed. Now, in China, particularly over the last couple of days, more than 20,000 number of infected people. So the coronavirus was spreading again. And then the economy is continuously going down. Back to the data this year, from the first quarter, 4.8, 0.4, and 3.9%. And it is almost impossible to target their goal, 5.5%. So why this happened? I think the most fundamental reason is China's zero COVID policy. This is including the restrictions of mobilization and lockdown, PCR test, and border control, and quarantine. And these are undermining, in my perspective, 5 things. And this is very, very problematic for world economy. One is supply chain and investment, particularly real estate, and consumption among the citizens, and logistics, and most importantly, trust. I think now the world is gradually losing trust on China, like particularly the 2-month-long lockdown in Shanghai, the very important international business center. So this is, I think, unfortunate reality, and this is what's happening right now. And what will be happen in the future, foreseeable future? I think China will be consistent on zero COVID policy, although they are trying to make it more flexible way. But I think now there will be 4 uncertainties. One is economic downturn. This is a very uncertain issue. And second, social unrest. I think now people's anger is accumulating. And I think people's tolerance is not unlimited. So this is a kind of uncertainty. Third, lack of herd immunity and potential ineffectiveness of Chinese vaccination. I think this is, I think now we are discussing about among China experts. And fourth, politics. After the 20th Party Congress, and Xi Jinping has again consolidated his power foundation. But it is a lack of check and balance, a lack of transparency, and this policy over COVID or economy has been done under this over-consolidated power foundation. And so politics is one more uncertainty. So these are, I think, what will be happened in the future. And finally, let me talk about implications for the rest, including maybe Bangladesh. I think three implications. First, figure out an appropriate and healthy balance between containment and economic recovery. So every country needs to pursue its own balance. This is very important and a lesson from China's lockdown. Don't go extreme, particularly don't very quickly and often lock down, something like this. Don't go extreme. Make a point of balance, your own balance. And second, check again your effectiveness of herd immunity and vaccination. I think now, medically speaking, I think now these issues are becoming more problematic in China. So coronavirus issue is essentially it's a medical issue, public health. So this is quite important. And third, finally, be open-minded to learn lessons from others. Don't be isolated. Strengthen cooperation and communication beyond borders. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kato, for keeping within 5 minutes. I really appreciate it. I turn to Mr. Ahmed, Tasneem Ahmed, and you have 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A very good evening to you all. Assalamu alaikum. I shall stick to the lens of speaking of, we shall look at this issue from the lens of Bangladesh. So that's how I have decided to share my spiel. So if we were to look at how beneficial has the government fiscal policy been during the height of the lockdown, the fact that we are all here today, some of you took planes to come visit here today. We have an audience full over here. This is a scenario that we could not have imagined just even a year ago. This, I'm saying, is just a testament as to the things that has worked right as far as fiscal policy implementation in Bangladesh is concerned. Yes, the side effect has been inflation, but the reality of today is much better. It's a much better alternative than what it would have been if the expenditures in healthcare and public consumption was not made. So in terms of Bangladesh, the best example of the benefit of a fiscal implementation is the transformation of the healthcare landscape of Bangladesh. See, before COVID, we didn't even have enough hospitals. We did not have adequate medical infrastructure to serve the entire nation. Since the pandemic, the government had spent money, had instituted many new hospitals with thousands of beds. They have advanced their IT infrastructure to provide medical services remotely and a comprehensive vaccine rollout. Now, as a country, we are much better prepared to deal with public health emergencies, a capacity that we did not have before, but now we have it today. So, in a sense, you can say that the pandemic was responsible for fast-forwarding our lives by 10 years at least. Because all the facilities that we see today, like remote learning, work-from-home culture, and remote services, would have eventually been a reality with the advancement of internet services, even if there was no pandemic. But it was the need of the times for us to adapt to such measures in order to continue survival. So in a sense, this pandemic had forced us to embrace technology today and see the gains of efficiency. And in the second part, what possible measures could have been taken better regarding fiscal implementation? So fiscal policy measures have done really well to increase consumption and thus prop up aggregate demand in the economy. But unfortunately, it did not seem to have an effective, it did not have very much of an effect in improving supply and production of goods. Let me give you an analogy of a Boeing 747. Imagine a flight lands in the airport, it's filled with passengers, it gets off, new passengers come in, and it flies off again. Now, what you will notice is that the aircraft never shuts off its engines. It's kept on idle mode. What is an idle mode? It's the mode that requires the least amount of fuel in order to keep operating. Basically, the reason I say this is because we needed to figure out how we could have kept the engines of our industry running and and keep them in idle mode instead of allowing them to shut down completely, which has happened in our country and in most cases across small to medium enterprises. This is exactly what we have seen in the automotive sector. I come from that sector, so I'm drawing an example. See, the vehicle manufacturers are supplied with thousands of smaller components by ancillary industries. And parts such as nuts, bolts, seats, glass, etc., are served by smaller scale suppliers, which does not have the appetite to withstand a recession. So once orders are stopped, the supply stops and eventually shuts down. So these smaller industry players did not have the capital to reinvigorate their businesses. So if we were to say in hindsight what we could have done better, or maybe to better prepare ourselves for the next pandemic, we really need to look at how we can prop up the supply side economics. Because you can give money to people to buy things, but if the money does not trickle down to the industries, they'll not be able to produce the things with which the consumers buy. And therefore, you have the situation of a runaway inflation that we are seeing here today. So it's not only the Ukraine-Russia war, it's not only the incidents of the Ukraine-Russia war. This thing has been on a boiling pot for the past 2 years. And this is something that I think we should think about as we go down in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This has been a miracle where all the presenters have kept to time and the moderator didn't give a long speech. Now, the floor is yours. Please ask your questions and please refrain from giving a mini speech. Just the question, please. And we have to learn how to ask questions, please. So if you give a speech, I'll stop you.
Thank you for giving me the floor. So I'll just give a short question. That is, after the pandemic, we are seeing the global recession. And now we can say that in our country, from the perspective of Bangladesh, we have seen that the import has been banned or stopped, and import-export has been stopped or getting stopped at very soon, and the LCs has been stopped, making new LCs has been stopped. So what are your perspective regarding to combat such crises, like increasing the rate of dollars and the stopping of new LCs, making new LCs, and what will be the impact of the economy? We know that there will be a bad impact. So what's your perspective regarding my comment?
Thank you very much. I'll actually turn to Mr. Tasneem Ahmed because you are in business and you'd be able to
Thank
handle
you.
this question.
Well, the first point I would say, I would like to put my hands up in prayer that the Ukraine war ends as soon as possible. The reason I'm saying this is because I know you're talking about the lack of LCs, the lack of funds, that it's a global precipitation that's going on. What I would like to say is that we as businessmen really can't do much about it because it's the effect is on a global diaspora. But what I can tell you is that the days in the future do seem darker if the global community as a whole does not come in and step in and ameliorate the situation. If you're talking about trucks and buses, I can guarantee you right now, 60% of our logistics are not working right now. The reason they do not start their engines is because it costs them more money to complete a trip right now in the current situation due to the 40% increase in diesel prices. With that being said, with the recession in Europe, none of the garments orders are coming to Bangladesh right now. So since the garments are not producing, there is no requirement of logistics either. So it's a self-defeating spiral that we are in right now. And honestly, that's why I just said, I wish there was a crystal ball I could look at and give a prescription on how this matter can be solved. But I shall hope for is the global community to come together and find reason and a way to improve the current circumstance.
Thank you very much. Sir.
No, it's okay. I want to draw your attention to another side of the pandemic regarding statistics and information. Can I believe the statistics of death casualties in China or India or even Bangladesh? So I have a question that is the information we got from the government sources reliable or the actual? I can comment two things, like the system of getting information is also faulty in some countries, and some countries are likely to hide the information. So how we can construct the policy if we don't have the actual information? This is my.
I get the point. You are absolutely right. There was a very competent report. A number of reports came out towards the later end of the pandemic. In America, like as of today, the global statistics, the death due to pandemic is 6.6 million. In America, the death is 1.1 million. 1/6 of global death is in America. You look at the next country, India, 1.4 billion people, the death statistics is less than or about 500,000, 500,000. Now, very competent statisticians and public health researchers, they have come out with a figure for India, which is 4 million. So it's 4 times the American death toll. But actually, you have to count death by million. Per million, how many people died? Now, America has more than 3,000. Bangladesh has 2,275 or something, or 175. So there are a number of issues, but what you are saying, this has been recognized, that in countries of the so-called global south that we have been hearing about, they do not have the infrastructure for statistical services. They do not have, frankly, we do not have that. So we have to figure that in, and I think World Health Organization, Johns Hopkins, data bank, they are aware of that. But in terms of policy response, what should we do? We should anticipate that there are different kinds of statistics, but the broad policies that have been discussed, the fiscal policies and the other presenters. So I'll give my other panelists a chance to respond to your question.
In my previous life, I've had an experience working directly with statistics, and it's very much true that depending on the methodology that you use, depending on the government policy and what they were trying to present, also depends largely on, I don't think that everybody around the world was very forthcoming in terms of being honest about the data. Not only that, but also the inability to collect statistical information. Now, the data that you've pointed out really largely don't make sense because of the larger population, and we know that Corona has affected most countries to a similar extent. There are certain differences, but I think that evaluations are still ongoing. I've read a few just recently. They vary in their analysis. The methodology is different. I think the methodology also used by different parts of the world is different, sometimes also not easily comparable. So I think that is going to be a topic of discussion. It is already in the present, but it will be for the foreseeable future until this data is compiled and we have a better understanding, both in terms of policies, effects, and other actually societal effects that as a result of the pandemic.
So my task now is to thank once again my wonderful panelists who kept to the time, and my audience here who have shown a great deal of patience. Thank you all, and we end here. Goodbye.